Good afternoon. My name is David Quick. I'm the Adult Services Coordinator at the DC Public Library. Yep, we're getting started. I'm going to be real brief so we can get to our speakers, because I know that's why we're here. But welcome to day 3 of the DC History Conference. I imagine some of you are here for our special guest today, but some of you have been here for the whole conference. Either way, welcome. I hope you've noticed how big this conference has become and what a great moment it is for people who are studying the history of DC and connecting with each other and networking and learning from each other. I'm really glad today to include Glenn Friedman as part of the conference, the keynote today. This is the 3rd year in a row we've hosted Glenn for one of his photography books that relates to one of our big focus areas in the People's Archive here in the DC, which is the history of punk in DC. So that's why we're here today. Before I hand it over to Glenn and Ian, I do just want to just represent the DC Public Library again. If you haven't been to this building, this is why we're here, to host events like this and learn about the history of DC and host fabulous author talks like this. I will also thank the DC History Center, which has been our lead co-sponsor of the conference this weekend, and hopefully you'll check out their information on your way out. The Humanities DC, doing really important work and an important part of the conference as well. So keep an eye on all of those partners who are making things like this happen. Lastly, Solid State Books has been our bookseller for the past 3 years for this event. Independent bookstores, like libraries, are a vital part of the literary scene in any city. Yes, exactly. Libraries and bookstores are in a difficult spot right now. You know what's going on in the country and the world, so please support libraries and bookstores like us. We're here for you. With that, I am happy to hand it over to Glenn Friedman and Ian MLK to talk about Fearless Vampire Killers. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. How many people were at the other? Glenn and I, this is our 3rd time, so we did the Black Flag book, we did the Minor Threat book, and now we're doing this one. Okay, forgive us, we have to go over some of the specifics. I'm Ian MLK. In the 1970s, I was a very serious skateboarder, and our Bible, the Bible of skateboarding, was Skateboarder magazine that came out of Los Angeles. And there's incredible photos that we really studied. We studied and studied and studied. And these photos became, for us, sort of something to aspire to. We didn't understand how people could get into the position they were in these still photos. There's no video. We couldn't understand how they got to these positions, but we saw that they were there. And there were people who were responsible for showing us in a really profound way how those people, like where they were. And one of those people was Glenn Friedman, a name that we knew. We knew, you know, Stesic and Friedman and Jim Casmus. There was certain names who you see these names like, that person knows when to take a fucking picture. And so,
and how to do it.
Right.
Not only when, how.
How, sorry. Yeah. By the way, we call him the corrector. But the, so then skateboarding, at the time, the soundtrack for skateboarding really for us was, I mean, Ted Nugent, like Double Live Gonzo era, any hard rock, and in Washington, any heavy funk. Of course, like we really loved Parliament Funkadelic and the Gap Band and Lakeside, but we also liked Aerosmith, anything that was just heavy, and that's what we were skating to. At some point, when I was in high school in late 78, friends of mine started to get into new wave / punk, and there was a lot of arguing about whether it sucked or not, et cetera, et cetera. I was on the side that, yes,
Punk
it does
is
suck.
Bunk, they used to say.
What's that?
Punk is bunk.
Okay, yeah, so we were always, there was an argument going on. I was siding with it sucks side, and then at some point, I listened to it and thought, oh, actually, I'm going to do this for the next half century. So then I had to make a very difficult choice because, at least in Washington at that time, skateboarding and punk were kind of opposites. Like the people I knew who were skateboarders just thought punk was terrible and they had nothing to do with it. And they were kind of tough guys, you know. And then the people I knew who were into punk thought skateboarding was just like some weird children's hobby, you know. So they just couldn't take it. So I had to make a decision which side I was going to be on in a way. And I really thought, well, the skateboard guys are mostly these kind of almost weird kind of jock people that were not very nice. But the punks I met were incredible. So I'm going to be with the punks. I was so blown away that shortly after that leap on my part, I started to see in Skateboarder magazine, or was it, I guess it was late, or maybe it's Action Now at that point. But at some point, punk skateboarders that I knew that I was really admired cut their hair and were punks. Tony Alva, obviously Dwayne Peters, Steve Olson, like these, even Jay Adams, all these like really important skateboarders, and for me important, were into punk. And that was really exciting to find out, like, oh my God, that you can do both. Now, I never really was a good skateboarder, so it didn't really matter.
You're pretty good.
I was all right. But it was incredible to think that these youth movements, these underground revolutionary youth movements, actually do have this connection. Now, in 1981, Henry Garfield at the time, but then later Henry Rollins, I've known Henry since I was 11 years old. We grew up together in Glover Park in D.C., and Henry was singing for a band, SOA. We became friends with the guys from Black Flag. At some point, they asked Henry if he wanted to sing for them. I took him to the Greyhound bus in July, the station, in July of 1981, and he took a Greyhound bus and never came back. He moved to L.A. One of the first things he reported to me after he was in L.A. is that he met Glenn Friedman, which was incredible, because Glenn Friedman was this photographer that we all knew about, and and Henry and I were both skateboarders together, so we were extremely excited by this. So now I'm going to let Glenn pick it up from that point, then we're going to come back to where we actually meet, which is incredible. Okay, here we go. You tell him about you meeting Henry.
After I met Henry?
When you met Henry. Like
when I met Henry?
How you got from skateboarding and then meeting Henry?
Well, I just met Henry after a punk show. He was outside at Okie Dogs on Santa Monica Boulevard, where everyone used to hang out after shows. And yeah, and I did run into Henry, but actually, and I ran into him before that when he was in SOA in New York City, selling his 7-inch records at the Circle Jerk show at the Irving Plaza. And that was
That's when he would have told me he met you then. Yeah.
There you go. There you
Okay.
go. But then, surprising to me is all of a sudden I see this guy who I met in New York City sitting on a bench at Okie Dogs in Los Angeles. And I said, "What are you doing out here?" He says, "I'm Black Flag's new singer." I said, "You're the guy? You're the one they picked? You're the one? You got the job?" Everyone wanted to do that because everyone loved Black Flag at that moment in time. And I just looked at him and I was like, wow.
Actually, I should tell you all that there was the Punk Rock Bible magazine was Flipside out of Los Angeles. And when Black Flag, we were closely following Black Flag, and we heard that they were looking for a new singer because Dez, the singer, wanted to play guitar. So there was a lot of speculation about who was going to sing for Black Flag, and we talked about it here in Washington. And then one day Henry called me and he said, "Hey, did you hear who's singing for Black Flag?" And I said, "No. Who? Like, who was it? And who is it?" And he said, "Me," and which was completely surreal. Because he had secretly gone to New York to try out. He didn't tell me he was going, and that really blew my mind. So anyway, we get to the point where Henry, these guys have met. They are now, and you did photos. You were making photos of Black Flag.
That is correct.
Right.
But by the way, I had already taken pictures of Bad Brains at that point.
I guess you would have, yeah.
Yeah, when I met Henry, I'll skip around a little bit, but I finished high school in New York City, but when I was in my last year in high school in 79, 80, I started going to punk shows because we loved the music, and I actually ran into this kid, Harley Flanagan. He was about this big. He was bumping into me at a Buzzcock show, hitting me in the stomach. He was so little. And he said his band was playing, and he gave me a flyer. And I went to a punk show in New York where the Stimulators were playing, and there was about 12 of us at the show, maybe 9, plus the band, or maybe that included the band. There were very few people there. And we started going to shows in New York. And actually, because it was a kid and it wasn't some, rock star on a stage, I actually thought, I'm going to take pictures with these guys. I'm going to make some photos. I can get close. I could stand this close and take a picture of a person performing. And so that's maybe the first time I shot pictures of a band. It was the Simulators, who wasn't on a big stage from the seats in a big auditorium, right? And then, of course, being in that scene in New York, 79, 80, I went to, the Bad Brains started coming up to New York City to play. And I started seeing them playing, and they were amazing. And probably the first time I saw them play, maybe 15 or 20 people were in the show. The next time I saw them play, maybe 10 people. The time after that, maybe 30 people. And then I went to college in Los Angeles. I went to go back and stay with my mom and be there, because I was back and forth, divorced family. And I saw the Bad Brains again in New York City. I think it was the Christmas 81 or 80. 81. No, but it wasn't a CB's show yet. CB, that was the next year. So this was probably Christmas of 1980, I'm guessing, when I came back from Los Angeles. It might have been 81, but I wrote about it in the book. You could read that. But basically, I came back to the show and I saw them, and I think their manager gave me a copy of their single. I, for some reason, knew people in Los Angeles, and I got it to Rodney Bingenheimer. And I also came back from Los Angeles, where they were starting this new way of dancing. And I came to New York, and I started practicing that in New York, where no one knew it was. And in fact, I was always a skinny guy. I wasn't very tough. But this new form of dancing, I knocked over everyone on the floor like they were bowling pins, and I was the ball. Because that's how fast the Bad Brains were playing. That was the way to move to the music. But before that, everyone was just pogoing, right? And so, anyways, we're enjoying ourselves. The Bad Brains are still playing in a place called the Botany Talk Lounge. A 15 by 15 foot dance floor is where the audience stood, and it wasn't very crowded, and the band would be on a stage maybe 8 feet deep and 15 feet wide. And then I came back to New York that summer after that, and things had changed quite a bit. But by that point, I had gotten the Bad Brains on the radio in Los Angeles just because of people that I knew there, and we were starting to spread this record, this seed, this, Pay to Come 7-inch single that they made on their own, and people were playing it. And then when I came back to New York, you'd known those guys because the scene was very small, but they were older than us just by a couple of years. And that's a bit intimidating. And they were from Washington, D.C. It wasn't like I was talking to Harley, who was like even littler than me, they weren't like, they were in the scene, but it was still a little bit intimidating. These guys from Washington, D.C., they play incredible, like nothing you've ever seen before. And so I was kind of like afraid to take pictures of them. But then after I came back from Los Angeles, I think I finally decided I was going to take pictures of them. And it was at a show at, 3 a.m. was when they came on stage. That's when they were advertised to come on stage. The flyer said, first set, 3 a.m. at a place called 2+2, which was on 2nd Avenue, number 2 on 2nd Avenue, where we used to hang outside that club and wait for cars to get in accidents, because Christie Street below 2nd Avenue was a two-way street, and 2nd Avenue was just a one-way street coming down, all the way from way uptown. But these are the pictures I took that night. As you can see, not too many people there at 3 a.m. No one's crowding in front of the stage. And this is literally the picture in the top left-hand corner. It's the first picture I ever made of the Bad Brains. And this is every single picture that I made that night. And I'm happy to say, or kind of proud to say, that in this book, I've printed all the proof sheets, and almost every single photo that I ever made of the Bad Brains, I'm very frugal with my film, is in this book. Almost every single one. And you could look through them yourself and you could see that. And they're even in the order of when I took them. So you could really look through the shows, and we'll go through it, and I'll point out some other fun things. But anyways, that's not really answering Ian's question, but it gave me a time to talk a little bit.
Oh, it's like that. Okay. So my Bad Brains story is that the first show I saw was the Cramps at Hall Nation in Georgetown on the 3rd of February, 1979. And at that show, there was all of the early DC punk new wave people were there. It was a big show. I mean, probably 300 people, but it was a lot of people. And in that crowd, there was these guys who were the coolest looking punks. We're like, who are those guys? And the people were like, those are the Bad Brains. Or, what is that? And they said, they're a band, but no one has seen them. You know, nobody knew. They just looked so cool. And then there was flyers being put up in Georgetown that said, just say, are you ready? We are, and had the picture of the Bad Brains. So we were ready. You know, we were super ready. And then we had heard about them from there's some kids in my high school. I went to Wilson High School, now called Jackson Reed. Yes, and there was some kids there who lived in these. There was a commune kind of place called Madam's Organ, not to be confused with the bar called Madam's Organ, but a place down the street. It was a townhouse these people were living in, and there was one of the kids there was recording. He had recordings of the Bad Brains, so we were very excited to be able to hear these things. And in June of '79, I went to go see Henry and I and a bunch of other people went to go see the Damned from England play at this club called the Bayou on K Street in Georgetown. It was a terrible club. It was really tough to get into. At that time, you had to be 18 to get in. I was 17. I was frantic because I had to see the Damned, but also because the Bad Brains were opening for the Damned. It would have been and that was the first time I'd be able to see them. I'd heard about shows they were playing. They played these parties out in Forestville. Was it? I think Forestville. But I was too scared to go. It was too far east, and I didn't know how. There was no subway out that way, and it just seemed like it's just a house party in Forestville, and I was like, I don't know what that is exactly.
What are we, 17 and 18 at this time? Something
17,
like
I would have been.
Yeah,
16
right.
and 17.
Just give people a little reference.
Yeah. So then. Actually, to get into this show, a friend of mine had been a Naval Sea Cadet, and he was a bad guy, and he stole some ID cards off his commander's desk or something, and he sold me. I went through they're blank. They're all typed in, but with no photo on them. So I went through and I found one that was, it said blondish. I had blondish hair and blue eyes, which I had, but it was a year older. So I paid him $10. The name was Kirk Mullings. That's the name of the person. And Henry and I, we went back to our house where I was still living at home. We took a Polaroid photo of me standing in front of a sheet, trying to be like I was at attention, sort of like this. And then I cut out, and Polaroids are not supposed to be cut out, but I cut out the head, and then I went to Pearson's Pharmacy and bought a homemade lamination kit, which sucked, and laminated the fake ID. I laminated the card. It looked so ridiculous, and then went down, stood in line, and then when I got to the door, there was two bouncer guys, and I just handed my ID to them, and the guy's looking, I'm not taking this, and handed it back to me, and I wish I could remember if I said it or somebody else. I've asked everybody I knew who was there, but somebody, and it could have been me, said, I'm sorry, you're not going to accept a U.S. military ID? And then he looked at the other bouncer, and the guy's like, So he goes, you go in. I can't tell you, that is the hair's breadth of not being in that show would have been devastating for me, because when the Bad Brains came on, it was on. Those guys, the Damned are incredible. The Bad Brains were life-changing. And I went to see them every time they played. They were not Rastafarians. They were just kids who grew up in Southeast and PG County, and they had their take on punk rock was mind-blowing because they were so disciplined about their practicing. There's so much precision about their music. And we would go see them and got to know them kind of. And then one day I get this call from HR. They had gone to England to open for the Damned. And they flew to England, they got to London, and they didn't get into the country because they're the Bad Brains. And they're like, who are you guys? And they're like, we're here. And they're like, go back. So they literally sent them right back to America. And I got a call from HR, and he says, hey, we got kicked out of the country, and they stole all of our gear got stolen at the airport. we need to do a benefit. Will you guys play with us? I was in a band called the Teen Idols at the time. So we said, sure. And then he said, we said, we'd love to play with you guys. And then he said, can we use your gear? Could we have no gear? And we're like, sure. Yeah, I guess so. Like our gear sucked, but sure, why not? And then he said, can we practice with you at your practice space? And we're like, we practice at Nathan's mom's house. And we have practice. You have to practice after school. But if you want to meet us at school, we can take the bus down to Nathan's mom's house. So we did. We met up at Wilson, and we took the M4 down Nebraska, down to Palisades. Nathan lived on Shire Place, and the 8 of us went down to the basement. There was a couch, and those were like, I said, well, I guess we'll go first. And they sat down, and then we started playing, and I was like, oh, this gear sucks. This bass is no good. The amp sucks. Doesn't sound good, et cetera, et cetera.
I love this
And then we finished up, and then they picked up the gear, and I was like, okay, it's not the instrument, and it's not the amp. And I'm just not to brag, but I saw them writing Right Brigade. I saw them writing Eye Against Eye, and watching them work, the way they communicated with each other, really the intensity of their practice had an enormous impact on us. And certainly with me, the idea is like HR once said, don't ever waste your opportunity on stage. Don't go up there half-cocked. Get up there and do your work. So this was an extremely important band for us. They were D.C. They're from Washington, D.C., right? We're a small town at the time, especially culturally speaking, and we were always like, we always had this sort of like, fuck New York. That was our, because everybody had to move to New York all the time. And then they started going to New York, and that's when Glenn started seeing them. All the roads are coming together here soon. And but then I remember one day they played a show in the summer of 1980, and I was talking to Earl, the drummer. He was sitting in the van right out there on 21st Street, and I said, how's it going? He was like, oh, yeah, it's good, man. We're moving to New York. I said, pardon me? He goes, yeah, we're moving to New York. I said, you're moving to New York? He goes, yeah. I'm like, what? I was upset about it. I was very upset. But they moved to New York, and then New York got them after that, But anyway, all this is to say that in December 26, 1981, my brother's band, Faith, was going up to play opening for the Bad Brains at CBGB's. And that's where I met Glenn Friedman for the first time. And that was a great night. It was super, super cool. And then we've become, best friends for 40 years now, or 44 years. And that's all we're talking about this book. All right, you can talk now.
Trying to see. So I'm going to skip through these photos if it works. Oh, it's funny. I took these photos. Most of these, I think this was still before that time, and I think the CBGB's photos were just after this. I think they're in order.
Before. This
is
the 24th, I think.
Yeah, exactly. It was a couple days later. And this picture right here, when you see the proof sheet, was the first one I took that night. And that one's kind of known. It's been in my books, and it's been used in a lot of places on some, bootleg record covers and stuff like that. Yeah, that's a great photo. I just love that photo. It's probably my favorite photo of the Bad Brains I took, where it's just one of them in there. But the cool thing to me is that you see that American flag up in the background, and I think if I can get to the next one, or in the next few shots, you can see that it's gone. Someone ripped it down off the wall. And that happens. I don't know, this thing, it's not really working to forward as much. But anyways. It's not moving? Yeah, it's not really doing what it's supposed to do when you press it. It takes about, there you go. Oh, see, the flag's gone. There it is. Right there in the background. And again, if you look at this venue, this place is, I don't know, the room is maybe 20 foot by 20 feet. And this is, and as you could tell also by the age Ian first saw them, they weren't Rastafarians yet. The dreads weren't growing out yet. And here it's just beginning, or it's a little later than the photos I took during the summer. And, and their look is changing and they're changing. But one of the most incredible thing was, of course, besides him knocking the ceiling out with his hand there, that's again showing you how small the venue is that they are musicians bar none. There's no one like them at that time at all that had the mastery of their instruments like they did. And I think the fact that they did that really proved to a lot of people. A lot of people thought in punk it was about people, novices, doing something, being incredible, and just having fun. But these guys, I think, it's fair to say that it was just another level and really just blew everyone away and made everyone have just respect for musicianship that they didn't maybe have yet.
Yeah. Yeah, they were as musicians, they were incredible. I have to point out, you see Gary's guitar here. It's a BC Rich, and they had gotten a manager, a local restaurateur named Mo Sussman, and he gave them a bunch of money. And so when they had all their stuff taken away, they bought new gear. And whenever I see that BC Rich, I always think that's their new gear. That was the stuff they got. So then this right here, that bald guy, just because it's interesting, that's Corey Rusk, who started Touch and Go Records. He was in a band called the Necros, which is pretty incredible to see him in the crowd there. He's actually from Maumee, Ohio, outside of Detroit, but I guess he was in New York. Did you talk to him?
I did talk to him. He had no recollection of this day.
It's 100%
and that's also
him, though.
Jimmy of Murphy's Law is right next to him, right there in front row.
That's Jimmy, okay.
And that's Jimmy to the left of him, and then that's Louis from Anecdote to the left of him.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So all these guys, everyone's in bands. The room isn't much bigger than you see there. I'm going to go back just this one shot, just so you could see how close I was, how tight the quarters were. Look at the drummer is in the corner of the room. The bass player, I'm right against him, basically trying to take pictures. Right? It's not cropped that much. It's a little bit to fit on a 2-page spread. But these are really. It's a tiny, tiny stage, not even 5 feet deep. And then it was an L, and there was another 5 feet here. And yeah, the room was just tiny. And then I think it was like Ian said, I think this was on December 24th, and I think that we met him just 2 days later, if I can get this thing to go forward, at the CBGB show. And I think, in fact, I even asked them if I could shoot a portrait of them backstage, which you could see they were quite reluctant. I mean, HR, I heard later on from HR and from Daryl that they were just shy guys. They just didn't really care for their photo to be taken too much. And so, but I pushed my way to the front and moved my way in and just did it because they were inspiring me so much. I wanted everyone else to know what was going on. At this point and prior, I was working for Skateboarder magazine because I loved skateboarding. When the music came out, I started shooting punk rock because I loved punk rock. I wanted people to see what I was seeing. I wanted people to know what was going on that they couldn't see. And Skateboarder magazine gave me a platform that none of these fanzines had. Fanzines are made by people in their community, and there were in the beginning, a couple of hundred would be printed. By this time, they would be printing maybe a couple of thousand. Skateboarder magazine had like 1 million readers at its peak in 1978. By this time, it wasn't as high. It had devolved into another magazine, but it was of international scope. People like Chuck Dukowski and others said, when they got that coverage in Skateboarders Action Now, that it just blew up a whole new world for them. It was just something, it wasn't exposure. No national magazines, no music magazines, not Cream, not Rolling Stone, or whatever else you want to look at that time gave a shit about punk rock, unless it was on a major label, right? So you get the Sex Pistols getting some magazines because of the extravagance, the promotion, whatever, and the Clash did. But the stuff that was happening in America that we were doing on our own, that these bands were doing, no interest whatsoever, because there was no money behind it, because there was no big promotion behind it, or I don't know how to explain it. But anyways, other than how I did. But these pictures were taken that first night that I met Ian.
Your clicker not working?
I'm trying to click this thing to the next one. It's just,
We got a slow clicker here, people. There you go.
There it is backstage. They look like they're really excited to have me take their picture. And that is the only time I took a picture of them posing. I mean, every single, like I said, in the book, I only took 4 images, 4 shots quickly in the book, and all of them are in the book. But the one on the left, I think, was probably the best one, even with Daryl having his hand in his face. That was about as good as it was going to get at that time, backstage at CBGB's. And apparently it was after the show.
So the Bad Brains, when they went to New York, we had gone up to New York for a couple of shows, and we started meeting the kids up there. And when I'm talking about the kids, I'm talking about like New York, the New York punk sort of new wave scene was like the Ramones and Talking Heads, and it was sort of that level. But there were kids up there too. There was Jesse Malin, who was in a band called Heart Attack, and who later on was in Degeneration. Is that what it? Yeah, and then obviously we all knew Harley, who's the drummer of the Stimulators, and we love the Stimulators. So the Bad Brains went up, and they really ignited like a young scene up there. So that's when you start getting the people who end up in bands like Agnostic Front or Sick of It All or the Cro-Mags. That was sort of the Bad Brains really were the ones that sort of set off that generation of punks up there, the kids up there. And they really became their band. I mean, the Cro-Mags as a band were initially the Bad Brains roadies. That was I think they actually got the name from them.
And I think it's important for people to recognize also that happened after all these photos, right? Like this was all done before, but this is the time that everyone's getting inspired. Like you saw those groups in the audience, and you see all these people in the audience. But there were a couple of groups, like you said,
For sure.
Reagan Youth,
Right,
and Heart Attack, and these other bands, like you said.
Even worse.
Even worse, yeah. They opened at that Botany Talk Lounge, yeah. Jack Rabbit's band.
Right. So the Bad Brains, and I was really surprised when they moved. I think that there's actually, and I was pushed back on this because there was like this. They claimed they were banned in D.C. That they were driven out of the city, but they were the biggest band here and the most beloved. They were not driven out of the city. They actually were really serious about. They were ambitious, and it took me a long time, I think, to really understand that they were really seeking like success in a way that was much more like they've won Washington and now they were going to win New York. And that was a part of like the PMA thing is funny because we all knew about positive mental attitude and we're like, yeah, be nice to each other. But it actually comes from a book, which is it's a self-help book about how to be successful in business. And that's kind of where they're coming, to some degree, where they're coming from. Not that they weren't also encouraging people to be nice to each other, but literally that they were, they've told me in years since that, we actually were like, we won Washington, now we're going to win New York, and they went up. Is this the whiskey stuff?
These are shows, this is at the Ukrainian Hall. These are shows. Right. So besides most of the black, in the book we have all the, and I don't want to get too nerdy with the photograph part of it, but just to explain, like I said earlier, every single black and white photograph I made of the bands is in the book, except a few. But then I had some color slides I shot because at the time I was still shooting for Skateboarder magazine and I would be using Kodachrome film and occasionally I would try and shoot color, which inside a nightclub is very difficult. With a flash and everything, it just didn't work well. So I don't have every single image that I made like you do on a proof sheet. You have the strips of film and all that. But the ones that I had, I published in this book as well. So, and here's a good example of some of them. And this was in Los Angeles. They had 2 shows in Los Angeles that I happened to make photos at, and these are the photos that came from those 2 shows, and before we came back to New York and shot them.
I think this is their second visit to Los Angeles. And the reason I say that is because I'm pretty positive.
This one's from the whiskey, by the way. The other one's
That's
from
the
Ukrainian
whiskey,
Hall.
okay.
Yeah.
But I think that this is their second. I feel like they went to Los Angeles in the fall of '81. And they must have played out there.
I believe this was not their first time there, yeah. Because this time they came and they really conquered. I mean, that Ukrainian Hall show, they had that famous flyer with Sean Kerry drew it with the brains coming out of the skeleton, and it was probably about 1,500 people. That was a big show. Then they had Bad Religion opening for them or something like that, and it was a more famous flyer. But yeah,
the reason I was going to say that
they impacted.
I know that I'm sure they came in the fall of '80. They were in LA in the fall of '81 because Minor Threat had broken up when our guitar player Lyle went to college in the September of '81, and then that was sort of the end of the band. But then right around Christmas, I went to see the Bad Brains at the 930 Club, and HR they had just come back from the West Coast, and HR said, "Man, you got to get." Minor Threat's got to get out to the West Coast. People want to hear your band. And I said, well, we broke up. He's like, well, you better get back together. And I was like, oh. And he goes, man, you said people got questions. You better give them some answers. And I was like, okay. So Lyle Presler had come home from college, and I said to him, HR says we have to get back together. And he goes like, well, I hate school, so I'm coming back. And so we actually did. We started playing again in April of '82. He came back at Easter. Yeah, there's Rollins singing with. I guess at the Louis.
This was at the Whiskey, and the Bad Brains were playing the Whiskey after that big show that they had at the Ukrainian Hall. They, very often bands will do a side show or the next day they'll do something that's not promoted as much as the big show, just to play for more people, make some money on the road, whatever it happens to be. And Black Flag at that point had been banned from the Whiskey, banned from most places. in that Sunset area from playing, but the Bad Brains invited them up on stage to play, and of course they're doing their, I think they played Rise Above with the Bad Brains, and Henry came up and sang the song, and then I think traditionally Black Flag would always end with Louie Louie, and I think that's Greg Ginn and Daryl singing backups to Louie Louie on the right-hand side there before you have the pictures of HR and Henry backstage.
Those are great shots of them backstage.
Thank you. Okay, oh, this is a very poignant photo, particularly today. Would you like to say something? Or let me just say one thing about the photo, and you'll say something else. The picture on the left here is of Al Burrill, and this was the, they used this on the lyric sheet. This is on the same roll of film that I shot the Bad Brains, but the roll started with pictures of SSD Control, who were opening up that night. And in fact, there are other pictures in the book of other bands from the time that I met Ian. His Alex band is in the previous section of the book. I'm only, these are random selections. But this shot was used on the lyric sheet. And if you could see Al, he was known for just jumping in the air wildly and just falling on his back all the time. They were an incredible, aggressive, probably the band from Boston as far as I'm concerned. And if you look at the picture on the right, he's actually there with his guitars broken in half after he fell on there. And
Al died this morning, which is a bummer. It's really sad. But he's had cancer and has had serious health issues for the last many years. But he shuffled this morning. So that's sad news.
Yeah, it's very tough.
Yep.
He's a great guy, but he was suffering in his last years quite a bit.
Maybe the most stubborn human on earth, Al Burrill. He's very, but that's what I loved about him. He was a stubborn dude. Talking to him was always such a pleasure, but also so vexing, because he'd just be like, he'd say like, it's on the floor, it's on the floor. And I said, well, pick it up. He's like, I'm not going to pick it up. And you're like, all right, well, then I guess we're at an impasse here. This is, ironically, this was some confusion. This is December 26, 1982, so it's exactly 1 year after, it's also at CB's, and it's exactly 1 year after the Faith show.
It traditionally, for a couple of years, it was either 2 or 3 Christmases in a row that the Bad Brains played 2 or 3 nights during Christmas when all of us would be home from school. And so I think the year before was one where I met Ian and Alec, where the Faith played, and I forget which other bands at the moment. And then the next year, SSD Control played with the Bad Brains. And I was in town because I was already going to college out in California, and I'd be back here visiting my dad during a Christmas holiday, and that's why I was at these shows. I made these photos. And I think this is the time, actually, that video, Bad Brains Live at CBGB's, 1982, this was one of the nights that's filmed on. I think they filmed 3 nights to make that one video. I think it's one of the best representations of the band.
That's an incredible shot of HR, by the way. The letter S. It's incredible looking, right? The composition is absolutely incredible.
You always like these odd photos that have never been seen before. It's interesting. No, I appreciate that he does. I have to be honest, and with most of my books, I'm, as Ian has said other times, I'm a very discerning editor, and I really like the perfection of the editing process after I make the photos. When you're shooting skateboarding and punk rock, nothing is absolutely predictable. If you know the songs well, you might have an idea of what's going to happen. If you're at a skate session, you have an idea of what's going to happen. But particularly in punk, it's very unpredictable. But when I do present photos for other people to see, I want them to be as great as they can be. So the ones that you've seen in this book already are the ones that I've edited, that were the greatest ones. In this book, I was convinced by my good friend Ian and my friend Zach that you got to let everything out, because people like to see it all. And maybe they are great, but for me, I didn't see them as great originally. Now that I have them in the book, I am happy that I put them out there for everyone to see and to make the decision on their own, whether they're good or not. But I think either way, it does tell the story, doesn't it?
We're at 2:15 right now, so okay. We had discussed, we can talk some more, or we can just start taking questions. We said we can do like 30 minutes of questions, so we asked them to tell us 2:15. Should we start a question? Do you want us to keep prattling? Keep prattling? Yeah, you're
That's too much
you're
pressure for me.
crazy. Question. We'll prattle on the questions.
But sometimes questions will lead to the nice long
All right.
stories.
Does anybody have a question? All right.
Make it good.
We've got mics, so wait for the mic. And a reminder that questions end with a question mark.
That shit loud as hell. My bad. How did y'all know, more Glenn, how did you know this is something you wanted to do, and how did you stay consistent with it?
How did I what?
How did you stay consistent with it?
Oh, okay. That was pretty easy. I made photographs of things that I loved and things that I wanted other people to see. I did not fuck around. It was very serious to me. It was my life. It's what I loved, and I wanted to wake other people up. That's how I stayed consistent with it. It wasn't, certainly was not making a living off it. I was just doing it because I felt I had to do it. And I think that's why it speaks the way that it does. It was stuff that, you feel it. You feel it in your heart. You feel it in the middle of your chest. It makes you move, and I wanted to make other people move. I wanted other people to be woken up, and really that's what it was about with all of my work. So when you do it from the heart, when you care about what you're doing, and you're doing it only to share and inspire other people, how the fuck do you give up on that? Thank you.
Hey guys, so I have, I guess, a two-part question, one for Ian, then one for Glenn. The first one is, so Ian, you were in the 80s during the Reagan era. I wanted to, I guess, get your thoughts on the feeling of being in D.C. at that time versus kind of how, the feeling is in D.C. right now, where people are, pretty much unhappy with the government. And then Glenn.
Pretty much. Disgusted. Go ahead. He asked you first.
I have to say, growing up in Washington, for me, I'll speak it to myself. Like, my family, I'm a fifth-generation Washingtonian. My family are never government people. My dad was a newspaper writer. My parents met at Sidwell Friends back when it was a Quaker school, actually. And we never really involved with the government. I always felt like the government was the giant factory in town. So if you grew up in Los Angeles, there's like Hollywood. Or if you grew up in Pittsburgh, there's like the steel factories. Or if you're in Detroit, there's the car factory. So my sense of the federal government is it's a giant factory. It doesn't mean there aren't good people working there, but ultimately it's making a product and people are making money. At least that's been my perception of it. So when Reagan got elected, it wasn't a surprise because if you're a Washingtonian, you're always being pushed around by the federal government. I mean, the Republican Party's been trying to they've been screwing Washington, D.C. over forever. I mean, it's just been going, look at National Airport, Reagan National Airport. I mean, I don't know if you all know, but when they it was National Airport, which is actually, if you think about it, an appropriate name for the airport in the capital of the United States, right? National Airport. But then this one dude specifically and a small group of people forced the name Reagan on that thing, which was, not to get into the weeds about how weird that is, but they asked people in Washington, D.C., and it was like, no. And they asked the people in Maryland, suburban Maryland, no. And they asked the people in Northern Virginia, no. And they said, okay, Reagan National Airport. And then they sued Metro to make them change every sign in the entire system. And then they sued the local news people. They said, you have to call Reagan. It's just weird stuff that they do. So this is the kind of thing that Washingtonians have had to put up with forever and ever. So when the Reagan thing came on, we just thought, well, that's what those people are doing. We're going to build something down here that's going to help us survive whatever mess they're going to make. And in terms of today, it's like, I would say in some ways Reagan was actually, even though he was an actor guy, it seems to me as vicious as a lot of his stuff was, it's not as totally insane as what's going on now. But, it's just a larger clown car, in my opinion, at this point. So, and ultimately, I think the way, I feel like, for people to continually think, okay, how are we going to navigate it? How are we going to survive it? So I think with the Reagan thing, we weren't really worried about it because we were just punk kids. I my first vote when I was 18, I voted for John Anderson, who most of you all have never heard of, but I was just trying to be weird, and that was a weird vote. And
He was the independent candidate.
he was an independent candidate at the time. But then when Reagan came in, it was just sort of like, okay, well, that's who the president is. That's the boss now. But what are we going to do? And that's always the question. What are we going to do?
We keep doing what we do. That's what you taught me.
Yeah.
We just keep doing what we do.
And so the second question for you, Glenn, is so you kind of, you came up in like the golden era, you could consider, of like punk rock and skateboarding. So
And hip hop.
and hip hop, absolutely. So what are your thoughts now on like current state? Like, are you kind of excited about it? Are you like, this isn't what it used to be? Or I see where it's going and these kids are doing something completely different?
There's so many things different now than the time that I grew up and was able to experience those things. Number one, recognize that those things were happening. I love them, so I made myself a part of them, right? I was a participant in all of those things, not a voyeur, not a documentarian. I was there because I loved it, and I made photos to share with other people so they would see and feel what I was seeing, right? Now, I'm a lot older. I do not go to shows like I used to. I feel I saw some pretty incredible shit growing up, right? I've been through some incredible scenes, some incredible revolutions of all of those activities, right? So I think I'm probably a little bit spoiled and a little bit, not so open to hearing a lot of new stuff because I'm just older now, and that's just the way I function. I think all of that stuff, if you go and ask my son, if you ask young people what's going on and what are they excited about, they have their own version of that, right? It's different now, though. Like, we used to really have to search things out, as you know. It wasn't just like you turn on the internet and you go to Spotify or Bandcamp or it's just the internet. I mean, it just changed, to say the least, a million different things. But the way we discovered cultures and we discovered new things was so different. So does that make what the kids are doing now any less? No, it's just different. And I'm not that guy. I'm not supposed to be photographing young people. I'm not supposed to be, doing these, I'm not a voyeur. I do, what I like to do, what I'm inspired by. If I see someone young doing what they're doing, I hope that there's someone young doing what I did for them, right? I think that's the most important
And
thing.
there are great
And they are, of
photographers,
course.
don't you?
Absolutely they are. And that's great. And just because we don't know about it or I don't know about it, I'm sure some of you in the room do. Some of us people keep the interest going and keep going out and are excited by it. Yeah, it's out there. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's how I feel about it.
I have just two quick thoughts I want to add. One is, people ask me this question, like, what do you think about what's going on now? And I said, well, that's the thing about the underground. It's actually underground. And if you would talk to so let's just think about it. It's 2025, so these photos are 45 years old, thereabouts. So let's just say it's 1981, and minor threats, and it's right in the beginning of all this stuff. And you go see somebody who was like in the Benny Goodman band or something in 1930 or 1940, and you're like, so what do you think about the swing scene now, or whatever? And they'd be like, they wouldn't even understand what minor threat was. So I feel like what's coming, we can't see, but it's coming for sure. The other thing I want to point out is that yesterday, Glenn came in yesterday, and because he was coming down to Washington anyway, this guy reached out from the Hip Hop Museum, and Glenn was on this podcast with Master G of the Sugar Hill Gang yesterday on 18th Street, this weird little hip hop museum place. And I've known Glenn for so long, and we've talked so much, but hearing him talk about his hip-hop experiences and the photos he was making with those guys, it was incredible. It was really, I learned so much about hip-hop even with a guy, at one point, LL Cool J's, like one of his right-hand guys showed up in the middle of the thing. It was very surreal. There was only about 12 of us, but it was a hell of a good afternoon. All right, question.
Yes. I was just wondering, when you took those photos, what did the family members of the Bad Brains think about them or punk, hardcore punk at the time?
The Bad Brains family?
Yes, I didn't know if their family members ever saw these photos.
could only speak to what they say about them now. I didn't know their family back then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, people see the book now, and they're really happy that the images exist. But other than that, you know, I mean, it wasn't about preaching the converted. It wasn't about telling people, you know, something they already knew. It was about, you know, getting more people turned on to it, right? And I think because of where I came from with my photography and Skateboarder magazine and having that sense of timing and perfection with my compositions and all that, I think that, you know, all the feedback I always got that people loved them and they were great and they were, you know, doing what they were supposed to do. To my delight or surprise, they're still doing it 40 years later, 50 years later. That's kind of mind-boggling. And yeah, it's hard to believe that we're even here doing this right now.
To my knowledge, I don't think the Bad Brains family, at least in this era, I don't think I remember I met H.R. and Earl are brothers, and I went to their house. They lived out in PG County, and I met their mom, who was very nice. I don't think she ever came to a Bad Brains show, pretty sure. And I believe there was a Stranglers show at the Ontario Theatre on Columbia Road that was canceled. The Bad Brains were going to play with them, and I think Daryl, Jennifer's father, came. I think I met him there. But that's it. That's the only, I never knew any of the other family members. I doubt sincerely they had any idea what was going on at all. Certainly no family vetting going on. Question?
Can I just add something to that? I don't
sorry.
think,
One more
I think a
add.
very rare exception, what we were all doing during these times, almost none of our families knew what was going on. My parents certainly had no idea that I was taking airplanes to San Diego to shoot skateboarding on the weekends, you know, and would come back saying I was sleeping down the block. And I mean, you know, people just didn't, I mean, you know, 15 years old, to fly to San Diego in 1977 cost me $9 to get on a plane from Los Angeles. And I didn't drive yet, so my friends down there, the older skateboarders, would give me money for the cab. It cost $20 to get to the airport from my mom's house, but the flight was $9 to get to San Diego from LA, and that's how I would get there. And yeah, they had no idea what the fuck we were doing. It's not like now they have the tracking on our phones and all that stuff. You know, people don't know. What was the question up here?
Hi. Before I say my question, I wanted to, oh Lord, I'm sorry, I'm very nervous. I wanted to thank you, Ian, for a lot of what you've done, a lot of the songs you wrote, because as like a queer person who hasn't really had an outlet where I can safely just, you know, feel understood, even though I'm not sure if you are, a lot of that's been very helpful for my development and me processing like negativity and the way I feel about the world. But I wanted to kind of spin my question off of that. A lot of what I get out of like hardcore punk from this era, like the Minor Threat and Black Flag, and especially the Bad Brains, is that being able to record that aggression. And I think that's kind of why I still go back to those records, even though they're so old and they're against like policies and politicians that I've never met or anything like that. I wanted to ask you guys if that's one of, like, why you think this music still endures. Sorry, that was very roundabout. I just had a lot to say.
A lot of those conditions that are talked about, those records still exist today. It's just different people's names. That's why people relate to them, and that's why it still keeps going on. I mean, they were incredible records. Musically, to me, when I listen to those records, it kills everything I hear today, that I hear. Now, again, I'm not as underground like I was, but, you know, I get turned on to stuff here and there, and I do hear good stuff. But they speak to people still because they're classics. They're great. I mean, they really, it was a special era where some special stuff happened. And I think because it was so much at the beginning, there was some uniqueness there that, you know, just lasted. I'm happy that you're inspired by it, and I'm happy that anybody is.
I can
It's
speak
not a
to,
given.
I can speak to one thought, which is the three things you've mentioned. And I can't really speak for Bad Brains or Black Flag, but I can tell you that as the lyric writer in Minor Threat, I 100% never included any kind of name or a person's name. Like, I didn't want to have I always was thinking this is about being young, and like the experience I was having being young, which I thought would be perpetual, because we're perpetually young, right? So I thought that if you look at the lyrics, you don't see me writing about Spiro Agnew, or, you know, I'm not going to mention I'm not going to put names in, and that's actually something I've been really conscious of in my life, to not date the music. And I don't believe the Bad Brains ever. There's no. I
don't believe Black Flag or
Black
the
Flag
Bad
either.
Brains
Yeah, so,
ever used political names in the music.
right? Or you know, and it's funny. I was just talking to I had a French interview, and there's one, and I'm going to tell you all this now because it's embarrassing in a way for me. But there is one word I use in all the Minor Threat songs that I think dates the time frame, and it really haunts me. It's in the song Straight Edge, which is, I say I don't take lewds, which is short for quaaludes, which is just not what you all are taking these days. So and it's funny to me because I always think, God, like, why did I pick? But most, you know what? Really, the reason is because it rhymes. So but by and large, I think just to be straight up is like, I wrote music to be heard, and I wanted to be heard forever. So I wasn't gonna pin a date on it, which makes people like, why do you want to hear about whoever, like, or whatever? It just seems weird to sing about really specific things when actually the problems. There's always going to be a problem. Like, there's always going to be, let me tell you, like, the government is always going to be a problem. Always going to be a problem. It's going to be a bigger problem sometimes, but a lesser problem other times. It's just going to be a problem. So let's identify the problem, which is the actual structure and not just the individuals. I mean, that's one way of thinking about it. So, but anyway, the other reason that you were affected is because music is no fucking joke. Next question.
Hey, Ian. Man, your music really deeply affected me when I was growing up. And I chose to become a hardcore musician as a career. And,
Okay, thank you for your question.
No, I had a really good question. So, basically,
we're on the edge of our seat.
in terms of taking hardcore worldwide, which it already is worldwide, but taking it to the next level, I guess, do you have any thoughts or opinions on how this can be done?
I have to tell you, I'm not a goal-oriented person. I've never been a goal-oriented person. I've never thought about, like, let's take it to the next level. I'm interested in this level. That's what I'm interested in every day. I just work if it's in front of me. So, like, the idea of ambition, I'm not an ambitious person. I just don't think like that. What I think is, like, there's situations to be navigated. There's roads that need to be sorted out. There's problems that need to be solved. But these things, it's like, for instance, Minor Threat, even though it's a very well-known band now, when Minor Threat broke up, we were not that big of a band. Like, we had one show that was over 1,000 people, and I think our best-selling record was 3,500 copies, which is not a lot. Now, if you it's a kind of a calculation with the different formats, but Minor Threat sold, over 1 million records. So that's a lot of records sold since we broke up in 1983. Now, Fugazi was a much bigger band, and it was really challenging to figure out. We had to really figure out how to navigate a music scene and an industry that really was getting sort of cemented in. I mean, it's really cemented in now by the corporations. But it was something we had to solve. But we never thought we want to be at this level. We thought we want to be at our level and make people work around us. All right, so. Do we have another? Where are we for time? Are we all right? Where are we at?
We're doing fine.
Okay.
Just one more. Sorry to take some time. You guys talk about Boston. You talk about New York. You talk about LA. What made DC unique, especially as the scene evolved, like through the 90s and as hardcore changed, as punk changed? What was special about DC?
Well, you said it was special. I don't know. All I can say is that I think in Washington there was we had to, I would say that, well, let me put it this way. For people who know underground music or punk or whatever you want to call it, if I say, oh, do you know any bands from the 2000s? And usually people can name a band, like, and if you say, do you know any bands from DC from the 90s? And people can usually name a band. If you say about the 80s, they can name bands. But if I say, do you know like a underground rock band from the mid-70s? That's a much tougher question. And I think the reason is that in the 60s and 70s, there were plenty of musicians here, and there were some great bands. But bands, there's no industry here. So bands, if they started to develop, they would move to New York, which is sort of why I had a chip on my shoulder. It just seemed crazy that we all had to move to New York to play music, since I didn't want to move to New York. Also, I was in high school. So so I think I quickly, I think that I was like, well, we have to, I want to see bands, I want to see punk, I want to be a punk rocker. We're going to make our own scene, which I thought was the point. Like the Sex Pistols were on a major label. We know that. But when they started playing, it's like they sent a flare way high in the sky. And the way I read it was self-defined. Like, don't just make your own thing. And who cares what anybody else thinks? Just do it. So it wasn't lost on me that to be creative or to be bored or passionate or whatever descriptor you want to use, those are not geographically specific things. You could do that anyone anywhere could be those things. And we were that here. I'm also, there's a lot of people in this town who just were really, we knew if we're going to do it for no reason, 'cause there's no way of making it. That's why when you said you had that you were interested in a hardcore career, I kind of laughed because I've never thought about it as a career ever. I know, but I said career is such a funny word for me because I always just think we never thought we'd ever make any money, period. We just wanted to. I know, but your choice of the word career, and this is not, I don't mean to give you, I'm just saying, it's just people say dude, how can I be in a band and pay my rent? And I'm like, I don't know, write a good song. I have no clue. The point I was trying to make mostly is that you just want to play music. That's really the mission. And I think that's all we wanted to do. And since the industry at large was based in New York or Los Angeles or wherever else, the only way for us to do it was to carve out our own spot. And by the time the attention started coming to Washington, we were entrenched. So maybe if it was an unusual scene, or by your word, special, it's because we had carved out our own spot. A good example is Discord Records, which Jeff Nelson and I and the other members of the Teen Idols started in 1980. And that label, by the time the major labels swooped in on the underground, this is sort of the Nirvana era, we had a label, so we didn't have a choice. We had our own choice, had our own way of doing things. Maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. Sorry, I don't mean to go off on such a long thing, but and I'm not picking on you. I'm just talking to you.
I got a question. Let's hear it. Yeah, so I think this is a question that a lot of us have been thinking about, and it might be a touchy subject, but I guess, what is the possibility about a band like Minor Threat or Fugazi possibly reuniting? And would Glenn shoot that show?
Does anybody have a question about the book? I don't. We don't. It's not. I mean, I don't know. That's not a question I would be able to answer, and that would give you an idea of what the possibilities are. So, any questions here?
Hi, this is for Glenn. I want to hear more in the trenches stories. We know how small those spaces are. Did you ever get hit in the face? Did you break equipment? Did the bands like to see you coming because they wanted the attention, or were they annoyed that you were in the way or anything like that?
Good question. I think because I would go to shows more often without my camera than with it. I didn't want to be a camera nerd, right? I just didn't want to be that guy walking around with a camera all the time. And also, I only shot those bands that were really inspiring me, And even in a band like the Bad Brains, the entire time that I shot them from, or that I ever saw them from 1980 to 82, I made not even 100 exposures, the whole time. Did bands like them? I think they did. I know bands loved the photos I made. That's why, I had access to do it, because I think I was doing it a way that maybe not everyone else was. You know, I had my own vision. I also had really good timing. I'll blame that on my skateboarding, cutting my teeth there. But also, you know, it's the character and the emotion and the intensity. Those most intense moments is what I was always trying to get. I wanted, because I thought that would speak to people. Those most intense, most perfect moments, and make them look good and exciting too, right? That was what I was trying to do. Did I get hit a few times? I'm saying all this because I was a person slam dancing sometimes. I was a person on the side of the stage banging my head, you know, right in front of the amp of my favorite guitar player, whoever it was at the time. But because of that, I knew how to stay out of the way most of the time. And of course, you catch a foot here or there in the head, I think my flash got broken off the top of my camera one time. And that was it. In skateboarding, I got hit in the face once or twice. I mean, but not right in the face. Like, I get really close to the wide-angle lens, and it would hit the lens and then hit me in the face. One time I got bloodied, but that wasn't even until like 15 years ago. So I never got hurt that badly. I think that, you know, from in the trenches, it's like, yeah, I'm a part of the scene. So it's like, whatever happens, happens. You're not getting, you know, it doesn't even matter. It's just like, you're just there doing what you got to do, doing what you love, having fucking fun, right? If I had to shoot some bands that I didn't like, if I was just a documentarian shooting every fucking band that was on stage, I would hate it probably. But I loved what I was doing. So that, I didn't care what was happening around me. I kept my guard up. I had just one little camera, one little backpack on me, and that was it. And that, again, maybe 1 out of 8 shows that I would go to, did I have my camera with me.
As a band member, I can say, and having Glenn took a lot of photos of bands that I was in. First of all, there weren't that many people taking photos at the time. There was a handful of people. Also at that time, film was expensive, so people weren't just like taking photos. They really would take their time. Glenn is extremely frugal about his photos. He only takes them if they're right. He will make the photo at that moment, but otherwise, he's not going to waste film. And I think that was true. Most of the people I knew who took photos were kids, and they were broke. So it's actually frustrating because I have like negatives from friends who took photos early on. I'm like, why'd you only take 3 photos of the show? And they're like, they literally could not afford the film. So the people, by and large, there were a few photographers who were obnoxious, who would just get in the way. Glenn was not one of those people. He was really present, he was center, but he was just part of the show. I think that, people, I've often thought like that the show is not the band. It's the band has the music, the audience brings its energy, and then you have people who work at the venue or the photographers. It's collectively a show, and Glenn was definitely part of the show.
And I was very conscious of it too. I mean, sometimes I would get right up in front, and I have a flash on my fucking camera. But I would get the shot and then move out of the way. If I was in front of somebody, I would say, "Do you mind if I'm here?" Believe it or not, I mean, I would just ask him like, "Give me just a second, let me get my photo," and then get out of the way. There came a time by 1989, 1990, I couldn't even stand seeing my flash light up the room and see the whole scene lit up because of me taking a picture. I was very self-conscious of it. And even by that time, some people started to recognize me at shows. I would even be at a Fugazi show, and someone would ask me a question after the show, like they knew me from what I did. Very embarrassing for me. I don't need anyone to recognize me ever. I'd appreciate if they didn't, but I do appreciate if they recognize the work. That's all I care about, right? But I stopped using a flash around that time when the film speed was fast enough and I could shoot without using the flash. I mean, now with digital stuff, you don't need it, and the cameras are so sensitive. And I'm sure I would use it again maybe once, but during those Fugazi years, like in that book, there's a really great example. At the beginning of the book, I'm still using the flash. By the 10th page of the book, because it is all chronological, I am using available light only. And it's also because, by the way, I'm just loving photography at that moment, and I'm experimenting with my best friend in the world and his band, right? And it's like, no one's going to see these fucking pictures anyways. I'm just making them because I want to make them, and I want to make these beautiful moments of these shows. And I love the Fugazi book, which is the first book that I did that was only one band, right? Because I did shoot them a lot. Because shooting Fugazi they were such an inspiring band, everything about them, the music, the ethic, the friendships, right? But to be able to make those photographs over that period of when they were alive, when they were playing, I mean, I had seen it again. I saw them play at Columbia. I didn't take pictures. I saw them play at at least once or twice before I made pictures at Maxwell's. And then I came down here in DuPont Circle, shot some photos. And of course at Fort Reno, those shows are legendary, right, for all of you people that live here in DC. But what I love about that book, and you didn't ask me about it, but about being in the trenches and just shooting without the flash and the available light, that book just shows the growth that I did as a photographer with my band of friends. And I would always get out of the way, and again, it was because I was self-conscious. I didn't want my flash disturbing the show. I didn't want to be in between the band and the audience. Those assholes who do that are disgusting to me. And they're disrespectful, again, to the band. Why would you, people are here to see them, not to see the back of my head. She's gonna give you a microphone, so you don't have to yell. This gentleman right here in the center, you want to give him a microphone?
Yeah, I got a question.
Okay,
Finding
we'll
local
get you next.
bands. Sorry.
Are you talking about the Bad Brains? My understanding, first off, I know, as I understand it, is that Daryl, I think he probably took guitar. He was a guitar player, and he told me that he really loved progressive stuff. He loved like Return to Zero and like really progressive jazz. He was studying that as a kid. He really liked that. And then I know Gary, the guitar player, was actually, I think he played bass. I think it was in a band. I think it's called, what was the band? 3000. I can't remember the name of the band. It was a 30th Century Man. Great name, like a funk band. But I don't know if that's exactly but I think he was playing bass in a sort of a funkadelic kind of band. I don't think HR and Earl had any music lessons at all. Daryl had told me that Earl just played bongos, so they didn't want you to be the drummer, One of the things that was so incredible about punk is that in some ways, if you had taken lessons, it put you like on a course that made it very difficult to play a free form of music, whereas punk was so, the whole idea of punk was to make a sound that was new and different, and it may be for many people's ears bad, but that was sort of part of the secret. That was the secret. That was what we were all so excited about, was that there was this form of creativity that wasn't being governed by a certain kind of formal training. It doesn't mean that people who were learning how to play music were somehow not, they were not welcome, but just rather that people who were not formally trained were definitely welcomed. And so I don't think that they were particularly trained, but they were willing to work on it and to practice.
All right. Finding shows in the area, Baltimore, Maryland, Virginia, the whole DMV is kind of hard unless you know where to look. You have Baltimore Hardcore on Instagram, DCHardcore.com, and Spite Lee, who does a lot of shows in Arlington and Virginia Beach. But I thought it'd be easier to create something where you can connect all those shows. So got this little subreddit set up, post every show for every new band that's coming out. But I feel like it's not enough. Is there any other way to support the community?
Sounds like a great
local
idea.
scene?
I've been thinking about that for a long time. Good luck with that. Get on, make it happen. I'm with you. That's one of the weird things. Like historically, like flyers were king. Like you would just go out, and the reason flyers are so important, and you go like sort of Georgetown to record stores and you see flyers, is that venues were not the bands were the point. And so for instance, when I was in the Teen Idols, we probably played, 20 different venues in the city. We played Fred's Inn on 12th Street Northeast, or we played Kelly's under Reeks, Reeks under Kelly's Irish Times on Capitol Hill, like these very strange and we would just play places and then get banned or whatever. But so you would go looking for flyers, and because their shows were just popping up all over the place. Minor Threat probably played in about, maybe 10 different rooms. So you can see already that the venues are starting to take hold. So there was a period of time where people stopped looking for flyers and they just started looking at the listings in the weeklies. Now that with the internet, it's like I'm totally confounded about shows. Someone say, "Oh, we played in D.C." I'm like, "Where? Where did you play?" I had no clue. Of course, I have no social media, so I really have no clue. So but I think it's a great idea. Make a listserv. Don't put it in a gated community. Put it out for everyone who wants to subscribe. You're on. Good luck. Good. What's it called? r/CapitalPunk on Reddit. All right. Thank you for that.
Hello, my name is Emmett. I was at the Black Flag book you did last year, and it was an amazing book. The 80s were, like, the 80s punk scene in DC was so political, and everybody was so, like, aware of what was going on around them. And I'm in the DC punk scene, I'm in a band. And how did you guys spread your socially conscious message? Because it's not so much a bad thing, but nowadays it's a lot more about the music rather than the message. And, in our scene, there's 2 or 3 bands that, really push, socially conscious music. But how did you guys get people to really, know what was going on around them?
I don't think we were thinking so much about socially conscious. Like, we weren't thinking in that kind of formal term. I think, for instance, Fugazi, we always felt like literally the medium was, the way we did things was the message. So we just gave a damn about how we did stuff. And I think that was true for a lot of bands. I think it was part of like Glenn, for instance, he comes from there's people like Skateboarder Magazine, for instance. There's some people who are for Skateboarder who are just straight up greedy people who are just trying to make money. And there's other people who were working for Skateboarder Magazine who just were completely aware of the fact that this was a revolutionary discipline. Skateboarding is not a hobby. It is not a sport. It's a discipline, and it's a deep one. It's a really interesting thing. And so some people picked up on that vibe, and I think those are the images that really live on. And the same is true with music. There is, of course, music is a business. There's an aspect of music that's a business. I would say that music is entertaining, but it's not merely entertainment. There's other people who 100% think of music as a business. It's an entertainment business. I don't. I think music is a form of communication that predates language. To me, it is serious. That's why I said to this fella, music is no joke. So if that's what makes it socially conscious, I guess so. But maybe it's just because within the punk scene, that's just sort of the common vernacular. Not all the ways. There's plenty of people who think of themselves as punks who are just really just like rock stars. But there's most people, I would say, are just trying to make something happen in their own community or with themselves. And that is a form of social consciousness. How are we doing for time? Are we okay? Okay, good. All right.
My question is for Glenn. If you could travel back in time, would you take a photo that you missed to include in your new book? Sorry, English isn't my main language, but I don't know if my question makes sense.
Can you say it one more time?
If you could travel back in time, would you take a photo of a moment that you didn't bring your camera on to include in this book about Bad Brains?
Of the Bad Brains specifically?
Yeah, I was curious about a moment you missed.
Looking back, I saw them 5 times before I even made one photo. So would it have been great to shoot them in a nightclub where there was even fewer people and more earlier in their career? That might have been cool, but I can't go back in time. There's a bunch of shows that I missed. So many times I was at shows where there were beautiful images I saw with my eyes in front of me that I did not get to make. And it wasn't until I was about 30, 32, 34 years old where I started going to Fugazi shows, and I said, I'm just going to bring my camera every time now because I'm missing too much good stuff for myself that I just wanted to make. And I had my camera in my little backpack with one lens on it, and I would start watching them play, and I'm like, oh shit, I got to take out my camera again. So, but I missed tons of good images for sure. And a specific show, I can't tell you, but there's certainly shows. I've got this one shot of HR doing the flip. I've seen maybe one other shot of that, maybe 2. I'm happy I got that. Maybe I would have liked to see it from a different angle. There's so many things that you could have done, but we did the best that we could in the time that we had, and I think we did all right. Thanks. By the way, I think so these two pictures, while we're getting that thing, these I think are the last two images in the book. There might be one more page, but that's Earl at CBGB's. And if you guys who get the book, you could see that in the top corner it says 35A. So the roll usually goes to 36. Sometimes you stretch it and there's no number on it. Every single picture in the book has the number of the frame of when I shot it as well. So when you're looking through that, you could look really closely and actually follow it, like I was saying earlier, through the entire roll of film, at least on the pictures of the Bad Brains. Your question?
Technical question for you, Glenn. What film speed did you use, and did you ever use a telephoto lens?
I never used a telephoto lens, I don't think, except for maybe once when I was shooting surfing or I was far away. I always use a wide-angle lens because I like to be as close to the intensity as possible and also show the environment in which it's happening. With skateboarding, that was a fisheye lens. It came from surfing. People use that because you can get very close to the action and show the pool or the place, and you could see the environment. The environment is very important to skateboarders. With music, I couldn't go that wide because I couldn't get quite that close. And to get that close, you had to have special lighting in those clubs. So I used a pretty wide angle lens. I think it was a 28 millimeter, maybe a 20 in the later years, with a flash because that was the only way. So this is probably Kodachrome 400, I mean not Kodachrome, Tri-X 400 is black and white, and that's all I shot. Whenever I shot Plus X, it was usually out of focus because the depth of field was very tough to deal with. And plus, just with the flash and stuff, it was just more difficult. But all the black and white is, 90% of the time Tri-X. Sometimes it's by accident. I had a roll of Ilford because that's all that they had in the store that day. And equipment was never, and still, it's not I like the equipment that I use. I've always used the most, the camera that I use this day is the most popular 35 millimeter camera of its era of all time for students. Just a little Pentax K1000, $100 body. And I still use it to this day.
He gave me one too.
Yeah, I gave Ian one with a 28 millimeter lens when he said he had an interest in photography. We just got him on eBay. There's some people who rebuild them, and it's a beautiful, simple machine. And it's not about the equipment, it's about the person behind it. I've always believed that. I never used a Nikon, I never used a Canon, I never used anything but a Pentax, except for when I borrowed a camera here or there. But yeah, I did. I'm just looking at these pictures right now. I haven't seen them in a little while. And that picture of Daryl, that base shot, boy, I just can't believe I even made that photo. It's so cool. I mean, look at the detail there. If you see that CBGB's, I'm looking at the same thing that you're looking at up there, and you probably can't see it in that detail, but that during that live in 1982 CBGB's DVD that came out, I actually see my flash going off in that video when I'm making that photo, and that's super exciting to me. And you just see the light coming in from behind him, and I don't know if it translates on the screen. And look at the veins in Earl's arm. I mean, and it just they were incredible. What can you say? They were incredible. I'm really happy that Ian and Zach convinced me to do this book.
Folks, you have been so lovely. We have one more question.
All right.
Thank you. I was just going to say that was Michelangelo veining up there, Glenn.
Oh, that's very nice.
Thank you all both so much for doing this. It's so important for the community. But I just wanted to ask you, Glenn, are you still making photos actively, and of what?
Not very often. Very rarely. When I see something I want to make photographs of, I make it. It is pretty rare. I do use my phone and I make a picture here and there because it is so easy. And I do that more often than I would have with a film, but I don't do it that often. But, I bought a roll of film the other day to shoot pictures of my son's band, and that was pretty fun. Even though I was the old guy taking pictures of the young kids, I figured, well, it is my kid. Maybe it's okay. And except for it wasn't with him, of course. He didn't want me to take pictures. Yeah. I just want to inspire other people to do it at this point if they're young kids. And I'll talk to a kid. If he has the heart that I had, half the heart, I will tell him or her or whoever how to do it. This is what you got to do. Like I said last time I was here, if it's from the heart, if it's from right here, just keep fucking doing it. And if it's not from here, don't do it. You're clogging the airwaves. You're clogging the internet. Who the fuck wants to see that shit? If you don't care, I don't care.
Thank you. Thanks to the DC History Museum, David, and everybody else who worked on the gig. Thank you.
Thank you. Great advice to go on. Don't clog those fucking airways, everybody. Last thing from me, thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Ian, so much. Glenn's going to be upstairs signing books from Solid State, so go check that out. You'll get a little chance to interact with him some more if you didn't get a question answered while we have time. But before we close out, Maria Ibanez from the conference is going to say some parting words at the last day of the conference. Thanks, everybody.
Woo, another round of applause for Ian and Glenn. Awesome. And a special shout out to Ian, my favorite neighbor. Always good to see you. Always good to see you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the DC History Conference. It has been an awesome, awesome 4 days. Is this the fourth day? Yeah, 4 days, right? I am delighted to be here. I am Maria Ibanez, and I am on the DC History Conference Planning Committee. This is my second year doing it. And I am just in awe of everything that I have heard and learned and participated and just met so many wonderful people. Where else can we convene in a space where we have access to musicians, historians, artists, educators, poets, writers, you name it, and in this glorious venue, the Martin Luther King Jr. Library, right? No better place. And the best thing about it, it is all free. It is all free, right? All of it is free. Where does that even happen? Where does that happen? We know that the conference cannot happen without the commitment and dedication of so many people. So I want to give another round of applause to the DC History Conference, DC History Center, the DC Public Library, Humanities DC, organizational partners, and countless of volunteers throughout the conference. You have seen them checking us in at the registration table, just doing so many things. And so please give them a round of applause. There's so many hours that go into this. Thank you. My connection with the DC History Conference began in 2018 when I was invited to speak on a panel about DC's Afro-Latino history, sharing my family's story from Havana, Cuba to Washington, DC in the early 1950s. My parents, my aunts, my uncles were among the first early wave of Latinos, and most of them Afro-Latinos who came directly to DC. Not through Miami, not through New York, not through Jersey, directly to the nation's capital. In fact, many of us, we lived in Mount Pleasant and in Adams Morgan and actually owned homes on Irving, Hobart, Lamont, Kenyon, Kilbourne, all of those streets, up and down the street. It was quite a community. I am a first-generation Washingtonian. And our families from Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Panama, Puerto Rico even, defined our communities, especially in Mount Pleasant and Adams Morgan, throughout the 50s, 60s, and 70s, with our Viernes Social, our Friday night social clubs, music, food, culture, and love of a new community for my family. Since that session in 2018, I've been an attendee, a participant, or a volunteer at the conference, and I have an amazing time every year. Without fail, by chance, if you attended the showcase yesterday, without fail, every time I walk through there, I end up volunteering for something else. Never fails. I think I signed up to volunteer for the DC International School. They have a panel, a showcase coming up with some students, and I don't know, I signed up for it, so I'm looking forward to it. I love doing that. This conference, I find, and I believe, is where we are inspired. I was inspired by history activist Patricia Tyson and researcher Dr. Kenya Ramey, who spoke about educating Black DC. I was inspired by high school students from Jackson Reed, and BCC, who shared their history project about Friendship Heights. I think I gave them some homework too, because they got to go back and do a little more checking on some things and add more stuff. I was also inspired by that powerful conversation yesterday with my friend, literary activist and poet E. Ethelbert Miller, and author and scholar Maurice Jackson. If you missed it, please watch the video on the center's YouTube channel. It was something else. It was amazing. I was also inspired by a UDC math major who developed a poster, and she shared it at the showcase yesterday to highlight the landmark Big Chair, if you all know the Big Chair, in Southeast DC. Just awesome stuff seeing the young people. As an adjunct professor at UDC, I was also inspired to see a few of my students at the conference. One of them is here today. Can I point you out, Ernest? There he is over there. Shout out to Ernest. Thank you for being here. All of this, all of the young people I see, the people I meet along the way and just chat with, people I don't know, all of this inspires me and reminds me to continue to talk about our history and share our stories, no matter the challenges we know we have before us and ahead of us. There is so much more to tell, and I love that we can tell it in our own voices, especially from those who lived it. It has been a fantastic conference, but this is not the end, so don't go home just yet. I know it's Sunday, but don't go home. Please join us after this for the closing session. It starts at 3:15, almost there. We'll hear discussions about Civil War Washington, teaching DC's rainbow history, 2 centuries of roller skating. How many of you did roller skating back in the day? Yeah, okay, so you gotta go to that. I did not. I was too afraid of falling. And then also a conversation on how theater turned DC into a cultural hub with Rebecca Medrano, who is a co-founder at the Gala Museum, the Gala Theater. Rebecca is an institution in Washington, DC, so please join her. Now more than ever, I also want to encourage you and invite you to continue to support all of our libraries, the DC History Center, and please add the DC History Center to your annual giving commitment. Now more than ever, we must do that. History is here to stay because history is where we honor our past, my parents who came to this country, our present, and to prepare us for our future. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being here in this wonderful session. I look forward to seeing you again next year, but please join us for the next session. Thank you very much.
Good job, guys.